Hi team, working with your unconscious bias, tutorial for delivery. Hopefully in the next 5 to 10 minutes I'm going to give you enough information to be able to run this workshop. We open with our titles, with our colour slide at the beginning, and we move on to aims and objectives as we always do. Talk through the aims and objectives and the importance of unconscious bias as a skill bite. Then we're into our question for discussion. Just like we've done before, I did groups of 5 around a flip chart. What is unconscious bias? How has it impacted you or someone you know? And what is currently being done within Merck? Get them to work as a group and then do your plenary discussion. Timing is completely up to you, but you don't really want them working longer than about 5 or 7 minutes when they're having their discussion, and then the plenary is going to take the same. So 15 minutes for this whole piece of work should be enough in order for you to explore this. Once they've all fed back, go to that third question, what is currently being done, and show this slide. This talks about the Merck model. It's looking at all the different kinds of biases that are there: emotional, attention, identity, and organizational bias. We are going to add value in this point here, the bit on decide. So when it comes to the mitigation side of the model, we're going to look at when it is time to decide on what we do, we're going to give 4 possible strategies to help them work with and notice and be aware of their unconscious bias. So that's the bit we're going to try and add value to. The first thing you're going to do is try and get them to start to understand that they all have unconscious bias, and we're going to run a quiz. But put that into context by explaining that we're processing millions and millions of bits of information at any one time. It's upwards of 11 million bits of information at any moment that are actually coming into the system physically and emotionally, and through sight and through auditory and taste and so on. So all that data, never mind all the events that are going on in the world around us, all that data is coming into the system. How do we process it? We have to have an unconscious mechanism in order to evaluate and to filter stuff. And it came from a very, very primeval purpose, I suppose, or need, and that was the need to survive in the face of threat. If we didn't have unconscious bias, if we couldn't look at a situation and make very quick decisions about its potential for threat, like for example a predator, then the likelihood is we would have become lion food, as you can see here. So we needed to be able to see and perceive and therefore act upon the threat that was around us. The issue now is we don't have those same threats in the workplace, and yet we're still left with these unconscious bias about people's genders, about people's sexual orientation, about people's race and their colour and where they come from. So all sorts of things will factor in terms of our unconscious bias. And we still run that software, that's still ongoing. What we're trying to do is to raise people's awareness of their unconscious bias. And we're not necessarily trying to, we're quite cautious about how much we're trying to necessarily stop people using their unconscious bias. It's not about that. It's about them having enough awareness to make wise and skillful decisions. That's what we're trying to facilitate. So step number 1 really is to get them appreciating the impact of unconscious bias, and we're going to do that using a quiz. This first skill, or this skill bite, is relatively PowerPoint heavy because we're going to pose some questions on screen. Here's how it's going to work. We get them to sit back in plenary watching the screen, and we tell them that there's going to be words appearing on screen, either male or female words. If the words are male, they have to raise their left hand and shout the word left. If the words are female, they have to raise their right hand and shout the word right. So, first word, husband, left, left, girl, right. So we're asking them to look at information and then process it. And we work through that nice simple categorization until we get a blank screen. How was that, everybody? Did that feel okay? Was it easy to do? Great, relatively straightforward. Let's add another dimension, liberal arts and science. The principles are the same. If it's a liberal arts word, left. If it's a science word, right. So we proceed. Engineering, right. Biology, right. Music, left. And so we proceed through the quiz, all the way through to the blank screen. And we're asking them, how was that to process? And it should be relatively straightforward. Moving on. Now, if you see female or liberal arts, left. If you see male or science, right. So they must raise their hands and they must shout out left or right. And off we go. Music, left. Mother, left. Philosophy, left or right. So we're working our way through these and we're asking them to categorize on 2 different levels now, all the way through till we get a blank screen. Now the bit that's going to be interesting is how we then switch the categories around. If it's male or liberal arts, we say left. If it's female or science, we say right. And what do you notice? Father, left. Engineering, right. Music, left. Daughter, right. Uncle, left. And we go on through until we've got right through to the end of the presentation. Okay, does that make sense? What we're asking them is, did you notice there was a processing speed issue? Did you notice that your processing got slightly longer when we mixed up the science, the science and the liberal arts and the male and the female categories? And the statistic we're going to use to explore that is 70% of people have a faster response time when male is paired with science versus female with liberal arts. And that's regardless of whether you're male or female. So everybody has this slower response time. So all we're trying to illustrate with this is that unconscious bias exists, that people have an unconscious bias, and it has an impact on the speed of processing. You can go online to the Harvard Implicit Association test, which is based on, you can do whether people are larger or smaller. You can do people who are different colours, who have skin tone of different colours. You can do male or female. There are implicit association tests for all sorts of different categories, and you can you can certainly get a measure of your reaction time when it comes to processing this information, the potential for your biases, and it gives you some explanation on there. So that's where this is taken from, and it's simply a way of demonstrating that we have an unconscious bias. It slows down our speed of decision making. The important point to raise is obviously it's not just gender. There's all sorts of different dimensions. There's emotional differences. There's organisational differences. We might have different perception of people who are engineers and people who are finance and people who are marketeers. We will make implicit associations or have unconscious biases about each of those categories. So that's what we're trying to illustrate. We just happen to be using the male-female dimensions in order to explore it. So what comes next? How much of a problem is it? That's the question we're trying to ask now. So we're going to ask people to gather in groups of 3 or 4, and they have to answer these questions. Question number 1. On average, companies with the highest percentages of women board directors outperformed those with the least female board directors by how much? So we have, this is taken from, I'll tell you where this is taken from. This is taken from, 1 minute, I've got the, this is from an organisation called Catalyst, which is a global non-profit working with some of the world's most powerful CEOs and leading companies to build workplaces that work for women. So this is specifically an organisation that's looking at women in the workplace. So here's their first question. Highest percentages of women boards outperform those with the least women by how much? Get the group to have a quick chat. 53, 27 or 79. What's the answer? 53%. So the boards with more women outperform the others by 53%. Question number 2. What about sales? What impact does it have on sales? Companies with the highest percentage of women board directors outperform those with the least by how much? Did they have better performance, 39, 42 or 61%? 42%. So they outperformed in terms of sales when they had more women on the board. Return on invested capital. How much? Companies with the highest percentage of women, was it 66, 83 or 61? 66% in more return on capital. So this is how important it is to have diversity in an organisation. So here's an interesting one. Men went in to pitch for work. Exactly the same brief, and if you were male and you went in to pitch for a piece of work, were you 53, 21 or 60% more likely of winning the pitch? Amazingly, you are 60% more likely of winning the pitch if you were male. CVs sent with European names. So these were identical CVs that were sent out, and the callback, how many CVs did it take to get a callback when the name on the CV was European versus when the name on the CV was African? What do you think it was? It took 15 times to get a callback with an African name. It was 15 times. With a European name, it was only 10 times. So that was the disparity. So the minute you change the nature of the name, the unconscious bias around the fact that it's got an African name caused it to be 15 more CVs that you had to send out in order to get the call back. So quite significant, really. So with all that in mind, so the whole part of the skill bite is to get people to understand A, that they've got an unconscious bias, and B, that there's a significant impact from the unconscious bias. So this shows us that unless we have diversity in the group, it has a negative effect. Homogeneous groups, we know that homogeneous groups tend to emphasize the qualities they have in common. So simply by introducing diversity into a group, you're likely to get different behaviors and different performance. So if you take a group of mid-20s white males and you introduce somebody, a mid-40s African female, the very fact that you've introduced that diversity to the group will create more diverse thinking. Other diversity becomes acceptable, including ideas and suggestions, when you have diversity in the group. So just a point to make about why diversity is good. It's very easy to associate with people similar to us, but it's that very difference that we introduce to the group in working teams that create different outputs. So diversity creates divergent thinking, which I think is what part of the point we're trying to make. So let's look at what we can do about it. We're going to go on to seek, this word we're using, seek. And the significance of the word seek is, first of all, we want to seek, beginning with S, seek diversity. And we've seen why. By having boards that have diverse gender mixes, they tend to outperform. By introducing different people into homogeneous groups, we get different thinking. So that's the first thing. The next thing is we can explain our decisions. And this is all on the handout, but this is our 4-step model that's going to add to the Merck model. So we explain our decisions. We explain why we've come to the conclusion we've come to about an idea we've chosen, or about a person we want in our team, or about in terms of any discussion that we're having. A is for asking for feedback. So we share with our team our desire to be aware of our unconscious bias, and we ask for feedback on whether people are noticing it. We check in saying, this is the decision I've come to, here's my explanation, what do you think? Have I taken everything into account? Is there another way that I could go about doing this? And then the Q, quite simply, is to question first impressions. In all sorts of situations, when you meet somebody from another department, when you meet a client who specialises in a particular area, when a new member of the team joins, question first impressions. It's really important to question first impressions. So these are our 4 steps: seeking diversity, explaining decisions, asking for feedback, and questioning first expressions. The place where they fit on our model is, we zip through to there, is just there. So the place where they fit is right here on decide. This allows us to use these 4 steps. Once we've understood, which is part of what we've done today in the Skill Bite, we need to know what it is we can do about it. So in that step there, we've got these 4 options. And essentially you've covered all the content at that point. The final step is to give the handouts and to give the commitment slips and get people to explore unconscious bias and what it means to them. And that's always the last part of what we do. Give the handouts, and in pairs or threes, discuss. So how can they make applications for themselves? And obviously you can invite decision and invite conversation and invite questions. But that's our flow really through the unconscious bias bit. There is a really good stuff on Google have released a brilliant lecture which is on YouTube, and I'll try and include a link to it in the lesson plan. But there's a great YouTube video watching some of this actually demonstrated by a Google trainer. And yeah, you can watch that video, but you can also get access to their lesson plan. And again, I think I might have a copy of that, which I'll try and let you see. So I hope that's helpful. I hope you feel like you've got enough. You will have to do a little bit of reading around unconscious bias. Most of the content is here, but it's quite interactive and it will throw up discussions. So I hope that's useful, guys, and good luck. Hope it goes well on the first time you deliver it.